on Yachting International Radio. Maria, I am your host today, and I've been joined with the absolutely amazing Kerry from Evolution Yacht Agents. And you were the operations manager in Barcelona, are you not?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
And you're the person that I need to, when I, for the longest time, we've been seeing a lot of things going on all over the social media, Facebook, just everywhere, literally. People always have a lot of questions about Schengen visas and also the B1, B2, but we're not going to address B1, B2 today because that's an entirely different subject. But I did want to address the Schengen visas. And you are, from what I was talking around and asking around a little bit about people that would know the answers to the questions that a lot of people have. And you were the one that was suggested. So thank you so much for coming on and answering these questions. We really do appreciate it.
No problem.
So we did have quite a few questions sent in, yes. And we'll go through those. But as we discussed yesterday, a lot of these questions are very similar. They're just because you think you're from, you're in this country or this country, a lot of the questions sort of have the same answers, don't they?
Yeah, there is a lot of confusion. And you're right, as we go through the questions, you'll see it is actually quite straightforward, and there is a set rule. I mean, as crew, you're either from a European country with a European passport, or if you're outside of European, then it depends what your country has an agreement with the Schengen zone. So, for example, American nationals or Australians or New Zealanders, obviously they're not European, but their countries have an accord with the Schengen zone. So they often say, I need my Schengen visa, or I've had my visa stamped, when in fact, they don't actually have a visa. What they have is a 90-day allowance to be in Europe, freedom of movement without a visa. I guess they've got like a visa waiver. So all they need is the stamp in their passport when they arrive. And then you have other countries who don't have an accord with the Schengen zone, like Russia, the Ukraine, South Africa, obviously, is the most prevalent one. And there you have to physically have a visa in your passport to come.
Okay. So it is different. I mean, I had quite a few questions from Filipino crew as well.
Yes,
and is that even more difficult? Like, I understand that, with Australia and New Zealand, but is South Africa and Filipino passports a bit more difficult than, say, Australia and New Zealand?
Well, no, that's the point. Australians don't need a visa to come here. But Filipinos and South Africans need to go to the process at their embassy in their home country to get a visa physically in their passport in order to arrive into the Schengen zone.
Okay, and that would be the same as, suppose, like me, a Canadian. Well, no, because we have an agreement. It's not a problem for Canadians or the U.S. citizens either.
That's right. So you have a 90-day allowance, but that's just, you don't need anything in your passport. You don't need to do any process prior to that. When you arrive in Europe, you'll get stamped in, hopefully with a smile. And then from that date in your passport, you have your 3-month allowance essentially to be in Europe. Whereas Filipinos, unfortunately, it's a lot more difficult. They have to apply for a specific visa at their embassy, which obviously is an expense and it's time consuming. And they need to have that valid visa arrive in Europe either by plane or by boat.
Okay. Now, once they get here with that 90 days, that's not a pure entitlement to work, though. For example, when I came over here, that's a tourist allowance.
Well, that's where a lot of confusion comes in, because the Schengen visa is for any Filipino national who wants to come to Europe. They need to get that. But if you're a seafarer, you're applying for a Schengen visa as a seafarer. There are other, for example, Filipinos who are not seafarers, maybe they want to come visit family or they want to come and have medical procedure. They can apply for a Schengen visa under different terms. But when a seafarer when you're signed onto a boat or you have a contract with a boat as yacht crew, you're applying for a Schengen visa under that premise, the fact that you're coming on a vessel, which is a foreign flagged, usually a non-European flagged vessel, and you're going to be working on that vessel. And that visa is issued specific to those conditions. And I'll just point out that it's not always 3 months with a Schengen visa. With Filipinos, and we often see that the embassies in the Philippines are issuing shorter term visas. So it could be you can come here, but once you arrive, it's only valid for 10 days or 3 days sometimes. So that's why it is very specific to seafarers, and you really need to have the right advice when you're A, applying in your home country, and B, when you're arriving or when the vessel's arriving.
So yeah, that's obvious then, because the same would go for Americans. I mean, they can come over and have a Schengen visa, but that's tourist. I mean, if you're coming over not on a boat, I mean, and then again, the visa gets even more complicated, because if you're leaving the States and making the crossing to work here.
Well, if you're coming as an American, that's where a lot of confusion is. You don't need a Schengen visa. You don't need a visa. It doesn't come into it at all. If you're coming over as an American, it doesn't matter what your reason for coming here. At the minute, there's an open, friendly agreement that Americans can come, just present their passport, and you have 90 days. You don't have a visa. You don't have a Schengen visa. You don't have a visa of any type. Your passport and your nationality allows you to come here purely because you're American or Australian or New Zealand. The Schengen visa is for those countries who don't have an accord with the Schengen zone, and you're physically going to an embassy and getting that visa in your passport.
Okay. And but that doesn't automatically allow you to work at the same time, though. So you have to apply for,
No, Australians and New Zealanders, it does get quite complicated, because you're coming to Europe, but if you're on a yacht, you're actually in the territory of the yacht registry. So you're on a Cayman Islands vessel, you're a crew on that vessel. You're physically present in Europe, but you're on the vessel. So it's almost as if you're not working in Europe, you're working in the Cayman Islands. Do you see what I mean? That's kind of where it's a very gray area. You do have to be careful, but that's how I try and explain it to our clients.
And what happens if they step off the boat, though? What happens if they go ashore? Does that change things?
Well, this is where you need to talk to your local agent. And again, this is when you're talking about Americans, Australians, that's not Schengen visas. That's something different. And you need to talk to your agent as to how the local port authorities and port police view that. So what we're talking about is crew who need a Schengen visa to come here, and there's very specific outlines in your visa that's on your visa page that's printed on your passport. And again, and I think I mentioned this, I say this a lot, so any of our clients listening will have heard this before, but the whole of the Schengen zone has one rule book in terms of customs and immigration. But you will find that local authorities tend to have different interpretations of that. So what I'm talking about, and as we go through questions, I'm going to be answering from the perspective of Spain, and specifically Barcelona and the Costa Brava in northern Spain, because Evolution, we have offices in Ibiza, Mallorca, Malaga, and like I said, they all have the same rule book, but there is slightly different interpretations. And so if you go to France or you go to Italy, you need to again check with your local agent and see what's required in terms of the process when you arrive or when you leave. But when you're disembarking on a Schengen visa, and maybe as we go through the questions, it will come a little bit more clear. But as you if you're disembarking on a Schengen visa and you need to get your visa stamped in or out, then you need to talk to your local agent as to how to actually go about that procedure. Right.
So, I mean, it just makes sense to really, because I know, and we will go through these questions, but a lot of people sort of head over to social media and Twitter and that sort of thing to ask these questions. But it's like you're saying, it's an absolute minefield. And unless you're talking to somebody who has the education in it, who specializes in that, you do run the risk of, finding yourself on the wrong side of the law.
Yeah. And again, some people are just, some people are just not aware. I mean, I think this has been the situation for a long time, but captains and port police, they weren't particularly very disciplined about it, and crew were coming and going a lot without really knowing what to do. So it is normal that nowadays, like you say, social media is the first place you go to, and sometimes you get some decent answers, but one person may explain exactly to the point what their experience was and how they handled it, and it's absolutely correct. But say they were in Tarragona, for example, and that's exactly how things happen in Tarragona, but that doesn't mean if you're in Saint-Tropez or if you're in Naples, it's going to be the same procedure. So yes, as with anything, obviously it can be a good source, but you do need to be very careful about what how you interpret those answers, and to make sure, check with your local, like you say, specialist, whether it's a port agent or whether it's the marina, and you find out exactly what you need to do where you are.
Yeah. Well, let's start. I'm probably going to mispronounce a name or two along the way, so I do apologize about that.
Yeah.
I'm afraid this Canadian girl, I don't have a lot of good. The first one is all right. We're good with the first one.
Yeah.
But Corbin, Kyle, Todd, Duff. See, that I could pronounce that one pretty good.
Yeah.
Going into St. Martin on my boat, on a South African passport. Do I need a B1, B2 visa? And what other islands don't require it? Any help would be appreciated. Now, I knew we weren't going to talk about B1, B2 visas, but he's the first one up, so I do apologize. We are going to address that next week, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I say, when people hear the word visa, people do tend to panic. I mean, and rightly so. It's very important you get it right. But a B1, B2 visa is required for all seafarers, all nationalities, for entry to US territories. So St. Martin is not a US territory. It's part of the extended French territory, the DOM. And so, no, he's a South African. He does not need a B1, B2 visa for that. It would be advisable to have a Schengen visa for that. And I believe that in the Caribbean islands, the Schengen visa is slightly different. There's a slightly different process when you're applying in your embassy as opposed to mainland Europe. So the best thing to do would be to contact your agent in the Caribbean in St. Martin, and just explain to them or ask them in advance, listen, I'm coming. Can you just verify or clarify to me exactly what visa I need?
So, and to be honest, I mean, the cost to have these things done is minuscule. It's not that much at all.
No, I mean, at the outset, no, it's not, because if you think about what would happen if you didn't have the visas and the expenses that you might go to lose your job, to get deported. Obviously, this is extreme. These are extreme scenarios, but as we see border control becoming a little bit more grey, we're not really sure with the instance that we've had in the last few years with terrorist attacks. We're just here at Evolution. We're just not sure how things are going to be in the future. So we're quite strict, just as an idea to get you, if there is any incident, you're in the know. You've taken the right procedures beforehand. And so in our opinion, it's best spend the money and do it properly, because if there is an incident, if you do get stopped with an invalid visa, or if you, for example, you're embarked on a vessel and you lose your job, or the boat catches on fire, or the boat sells, and you're stranded, say, in a country where your visa is required and you don't have one, it could end up being a very expensive exercise. Yeah. So yeah, that's the way we view it here at Evolution, for sure.
Well, and I mean, it just makes sense, really. Yeah. It's better to be prepared than to, figure out. It's usually when you're prepared that nothing happens. And it's usually when you're not prepared that the worst does happen. So it's yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, let's go on to Chloe Bradford. Hello, fellow Australians. Has anyone ran into any visa issues whilst on the yachts? Is there any visa recommendations prior to arriving? Thanks in advance. I think you probably answered that already to an extent.
Yeah, but let's do it specifically for Chloe, just so she's clear. So yeah, as an Australian, whether you're on a yacht or not, you don't need a visa to enter Europe. Obviously, she doesn't mention where she's going, where the yacht's going. It's a very generic question there. But in terms of coming to Europe, if she's coming to Europe on a yacht, then she would not need any visa beforehand. Again, if she's going elsewhere to the South Pacific, or to the Asian countries, I don't know how that works there, but Australians tend to have pretty good passport, and usually there's not too many places where they're required for a visa. But like I say, it's always best to check ahead with the captain for the boat's itinerary, and then with local agents.
Perfect. And the next one, yeah, I'm going to have a little trouble with this. Tallulah Ray Hines, Safa,
Yep.
South African. There you go. Yeah. My Schengen visa expires on the 9th of July. If I get stamped onto a boat, which is Jamaican flagged, what is the process of getting a transit visa in 6 months' time after the contract ends to fly home to South Africa if the boat is in French Polynesia?
Yeah, that's a long question, but that's a good one because it's specific, so we can deal with a specific situation here. So, um, as I said before, a Schengen visa needs to be valid when you're traveling to and from countries. When you're on a vessel, embarked on a vessel with a valid contract and on the crew list, the authorities kind of view as if you're in the territory of the flag registry. So let's say she's on the Cayman Islands vessel. The authorities in the Schengen zone will view her as in the Cayman Islands. In order to disembark, if the boat is in Europe, if she wants to disembark, she would need to have a valid visa of some kind to travel from the yacht to her home country. So that's what she means here about a transit visa when her contract ends to fly home to South Africa. I don't know how things are treated in French Polynesia. She would need to check with her local agent, but it's the same as Saint Martin. It's one of the DOM territories of France, so there will be some form of Schengen visa required, and usually it would be just a question of asking your local agent there, and they'll know what procedures are required to get that transit visa so she can disembark and fly back to South Africa.
Okay. But that was a complicated one and actually quite interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is, and no, it was a good one to answer.
Jazz Regar, as an Australian, I automatically have the Schengen visa when entering EU. If I was to work on an EU flagged vessel, I would get stamped out of the EU and onto the boat. However, the boat is an EU vessel that stays in EU waters. So does that still stop my Schengen visa whilst on the boat, or is this not possible for me to do?
So again, we've got this. She's Australian, so she doesn't need a Schengen visa. She doesn't need any kind of visa. Her passport allows her to enter the EU. But it is a valid question because she has limited time. So as we said before, she'll come in, and when she gets stamped into Europe, she'll have a 90-day, she'll be allowed to stay for 90 days in Europe. And normally what happens then is if you're on a crew list and you have a valid contract, you can go to your local port immigration police, and same as the Schengen visa, the port police can put a stamp out in your passport. So if you embarked by plane, for example, you would have arrived into the EU, say into Spain. She would have got an in stamp in her passport when she arrives at the airport. And then when she's embarked on the vessel, if the vessel's going to stay in EU, and obviously her days are counting, those 90 days will count down from the day that in stamp is in her passport. From that time, she can go to the port immigration police, and they can stamp her out with this idea that she's not roaming freely within Europe. She's actually in the Cayman Islands on the vessel. Oh, sorry, she's on a European
EU boat.
She's on an EU boat, and she's this is a little bit grey because actually here in Spain, the port police will still stamp her out. Will still do it as if she's on a Cayman Islands or non-EU vessel. But like I say, that may not be the case in France or Italy or Greece. She needs to check with the local agent.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting one actually, because how does that work exactly? The next one, this is another hard name, Menelise Jethro. Can somebody? Do you know how to pronounce that better than I do?
No, that sounds good to me. That's a pretty good one.
Can somebody please advise me with the best way on how to get a Schengen visa if you are a South African and are looking to apply for work aboard a super yacht in Palma, especially if you are applying here in Cape Town? And what visas would you recommend to apply for either than the Schengen visa?
Okay, this is a good question as well. So this is obviously somebody who's starting out in the industry, and they're correct in thinking they need a Schengen visa to come to Europe. The difficulty they're going to have is to apply for a Schengen visa without first having a job, because usually when you're applying for a Schengen visa and there is a consulate in Cape Town, so they can't, which issues visa, so they can go to Cape Town for that visa. But the issue they're going to have is when they're applying, they need to already show that they have a job, a yacht or a contract in place.
Okay.
So that he needs to look first of all, and hopefully try and secure himself a job before applying for the visa. There are local agents in South Africa who do help yacht crew with these kind of issues, and so it may be worthwhile contacting one of the yacht crew agencies in South Africa and see what they advise. But from our experience, it is a very straightforward procedure once you have the boat papers that you can present to the embassy.
And that's sometimes the difficulty, is getting the job, because they want to be here to do the dock walking and to do the networking in order to get the job. But yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22, that is, for sure.
Yes, it is. But that's why I think in the last couple of years, there's been a few agencies pop up in South Africa to help yachties kind of get over that hurdle, maybe, or help them secure a position from South Africa in order for them to go ahead and get the visa that they require.
Right. The next one, Igor Tatrinov. Can someone tell me, please, if I can arrive by boat to Antibes without a Schengen visa, with just a seaman's book and boat papers, Russian passport? Has anyone done that? What's the procedure, and where do I go upon arrival if there's a solution? My Schengen expired 2 days ago. Don't have the time to make a new one. Doing a crossing and then 2 weeks in the yard. Is that realistic?
Again, this is a very good question. So thank you, Igor, for this, because this just highlights another aspect of the visas, which is he can indeed, I'll answer the question, he can indeed arrive on the vessel into European waters without a valid visa. Why? Because the port police will view him as still in the territory of the vessel, and as long as he stays on board the vessel, he's in the territory of the vessel. He's not roaming freely within Europe. He cannot disembark, and he could not fly to Paris for the weekend, for example. He does not have that freedom of movement, but he is legally allowed to be on the boat, staying on the boat. Here in Spain, there is a restriction of 10 kilometers from the vessel, so he wouldn't be able to move more than 10 kilometers from the vessel. So that would mean that in his situation, if the boat's arriving, he doesn't have a visa, he stays on the boat, he stays in the shipyard for 2 weeks, and then the boat leaves Europe, there's no problem at all. The issue will come if, while he's in Europe, he needs to disembark. So he needs to go on holiday, or he quits his job. At that point, he'll need to apply for a transit visa, also called an exit visa, with the local port police. Again, your local yacht agent can facilitate this for you. And so at that point, he will be issued with an exit visa, which is usually a 3-day visa, and that allows you to disembark from the vessel, travel to the airport, and then fly to your home country. That's why it's called a transit visa or exit visa. So that's a very good question.
Yeah, and it's a Russian crew, so that sort of creates something different as well. Sarah Huron, I am on a contract until the 31st of October with a Schengen visa that expires end of September. The green mamba strikes again. What are my options? Extension, Seaman's book, international fraud, marry somebody with a better passport. She's South African.
Well, I think when I looked at this, I thought if you marry someone with a better passport, it might bring around more complicated issues. So I would recommend that she talks to her local agent again. But this, I can answer this. If she's signed onto the crew list and she has an employment contract, she can stay on board the vessel, just like our Russian friend Igor, until time to disembark. And it's again the same as with Igor. At that point, he will talk to the local agent, whichever port they're in, and get an exit visa or a transit visa, and at which point she can travel to her home country, and then at that point apply for another visa in order to be able to come back.
Okay. Alicia Allison Woodham. I am trying to get a Schengen visa, but don't have a job yet. How can I apply for one if I don't know where I am boarding or when? Do I roughly estimate? And she didn't say where she was from. So that,
That's what she doesn't mention where she's from. Let's assume she's South African. She Yeah, so there's a job at is what we were saying before. She doesn't have a job yet. Again, I'm not on that side of because within the Schengen zone. We're not outside the Schengen zone helping crew to actually get the visa in the first place. I'm not an expert on that, but from my experience, it would be a question of trying to secure a job first and then applying. There is an agency called South African Yachties, I think, which has come up on my radar a few times, and they're based in South Africa, and they do help crew get visas. So I would definitely recommend talking to them or another agent and seeing what they advise, see if there is a special trick to trying to get this visa before you get a job.
okay. Kyle Rod. I quickly wanted to find out what the go was in terms of traveling to the Schengen region on an Australian passport. To my knowledge, I get 90 days without a visa, but is it worth applying for a Schengen visa to get jobs, etc.? I have seen jobs being advertised that require the visa, but I'm not sure if I need to go about the process because of the 90-day allowance.
Yeah, so here he's spot on in one sense, and then we can clarify things in the other sense. So he doesn't need a Schengen visa because Australia has the agreement already with the Schengen zone. He's right in saying that he gets 90 days, but he's incorrect to think that he can apply for a visa to extend that or get more. So he can come anyway. Fortunately for him, he wouldn't necessarily need a job beforehand because he can turn up in Europe and he's got 90 days to secure a job before legally he's supposed to leave. And yeah, he probably is right. There's lots of jobs who are saying they need the visa, but they're probably targeting at non-Schengen, at other countries who do need the Schengen visa. That would be applicable if he was from Russia or if he was from the Philippines or South Africa. But yeah, as an Australian, he's got a little bit more easy than those guys do.
I actually have a question. This has sort of raised something in my mind is what happens if they just decide to come as a tourist, if they say they're coming as a tourist from South Africa, for example, and they come here and they're actually coming to Dock Walk to get a job. What happens then?
If they're coming as a tourist, I think they would need to, they may not necessarily have the 90 days. I'm not sure how the tourist visas are issued there. They would need to show their flights, where they're staying. I think probably show kind of resource or funds in their account. And when they, if they do happen to secure a job while they're here on the tourist visa, it's worth speaking to the local yacht agent, but probably they would need to refer back to the embassy, I think, to see if they would need to go back and change it to a seafarer visa. I have a funny feeling that they would need to do that. I don't come across too many South Africans with tourist visas in their passport. Usually the ones that come to me, they've all got the seafarer visa, the Type C visa. But no, that is a good question. It might be a way around. Again, if they talk to the South African agents, they might be able to advise and answer that question more properly.
Okay. Leanne Smith, currently in Italy and stamped onto a boat. I'm on a South African passport and my visa expires end of the month. How do I get a new Schengen visa while still being on board in Italy? Or is there any option to work around this without having to fly back to South Africa?
That again that brings up another good point, because quite often we get asked, how can I renew or extend my visa while I'm still in Europe? And the answer is, for a seafarer visa, it can't be done. Unfortunately, she would need to go back to her home country and get a new visa for that, which would not be a problem if she's got a contract and she's kept the terms of her current visa, so she hasn't invalidated it. She can present a contract. But if she stays in Italy and doesn't want the hassle of going home, there's not too many options for her, unfortunately.
Yeah, that is unfortunate because that's a long trip, isn't it?
And it's expensive and it's getting exactly. But like we said before, it doesn't mean she can't finish the season. Even if her, her visa expires at the end of the month. So at the end of, so in the next few days. but she can still carry on working on board the boat with an invalid visa because she's still in the territory of the flag registry. And just whenever the season ends or her contract ends, which could be September, October, November, December, she can apply for a transit visa to go home. That short-term 3-day visa, remember I mentioned? She can go home to South Africa, get a new visa. In the meantime, she can still work and live on board the boat. She just is limited. She can't travel too far from the boat.
So that the 10-kilometer radius applies in this situation.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's not that bad, really. I mean, at least it gives them the, I can finish out my contract, and then, once the contract is over, or I get vacation, I can take the time off and I can go and do the paperwork that needs to be done.
Yeah. Another thing that crew get confused on as well is, if your visa is invalid and you want to disembark, unfortunately, you have to leave the Schengen zone straight away. The transit visa does not allow you to go to Paris for a quick weekend before you fly home. So when you apply for the visa, you have to leave immediately and go back to South Africa.
Right. Okay. Jocelyn Harding, can anyone please explain to me how a South African would go about getting a maritime visa for Europe, especially if they're not yet employed? We did touch on that.
Yeah, exactly. So get in touch with South African Yachties or another agent, or speak to some other, maybe there's a forum for South African crew on social media, and see how other people have managed that situation.
Yeah. Alexei Faye Cooper, I heard something about Italian and Spanish embassy allowing visa extensions. Anyone know more about this? I have an Italian Schengen visa that expires the 18th of October, but would love to extend it. And she didn't say what country, but it doesn't sound like a South African name to me, but I don't know.
Mm. Again, when you're physically in the Schengen zone, you cannot renew the visa at an embassy here. You have to step outside of the Schengen zone to renew it. And so far I've been saying go back to your home country to get a new one, but you can, for example, you can get it from an embassy that's outside the Schengen zone. So you could go to London, for example, and go to the Spanish embassy there or the Italian embassy there and apply for an extension there. But that means obviously leaving Europe, flying to London, staying there with all the expenses, and usually embassies tend to look more fairly on their own nationals. So I would always recommend going to your home country and getting it done now.
Christy McNabb, heyo, I need a bit of advice on visa shenanigans. My Schengen visa expires on 07 of October. If my yacht contract goes past that to the end of October, what do I do when I need to fly out of France, a transit visa? I think she answered her own question pretty much.
Yep, that's right, correct. You stay on board, you finish your contract, and then at that point you try and secure an exit visa through your local yacht agent, fly home, and start all over again, get a new visa, and hopefully come back to your job.
Fingers crossed. Tony Marie Compain, Fiji passport holder. This is a good one. Anyone ever applied for a Schengen visa outside their country of passport residence without having residency in the country you applied in and have been approved? Which embassy was it, and were they helpful, and did you get a visa granted? Having trouble finding any embassy that will accept my application here in the UK.
Okay, so that kind of, that raises what we spoke about last time. And in my notes here, I've put that actually I do see quite a few visas issued in Miami, and Kuala Lumpur is another one that I see. So she's correct in thinking she wouldn't have to travel all the way back to Fiji. Whether she wants to travel to the US, obviously, I think with a Fiji passport, she might need a visa to get to the US. That's the other thing to think about. South Africans, if you're flying to the UK to renew your Schengen for the UK, so it's not always the best option for that reason. But she's correct in saying it doesn't necessarily need to be your home country.
Wow. Joanne Junior Cifuentes. Hello, I used to have a Terra de Séjour and has expired in 2014 after a long stay in France and Italy. I was issued this as I used to work on private yachts, but now since it's already expired, do I still have a chance to apply for a Schengen visa, even if I don't have a recommendations from a person who would like to hire me? As I was once applied as a crew on a private yacht, and they wanted to hire me because of my experience. but my problem is I don't have a Schengen visa anymore. How then could I apply so that I may be hired again on a private chartered yacht in Europe? And I do believe he is Filipino, this one.
Yeah. This is a little bit, this kind of question goes around in circles a little bit. I'm not sure I understand fully the question, but I think that what he needs is he needs someone to offer him employment, and then he can go to his home country and apply for the Schengen visa at the relevant embassy there. I'm not really sure how work visas. He says he had I think he means carte de séjour, which is a work visa, or it's a permission to reside and sometimes work in France and Italy.
Okay.
And with that, if you have residency, so if you're Filipino, for example, we have residency in Europe, which we do sometimes see. The residency in Europe nullifies the need for a Schengen visa, because you're able to come and spend time you're able to reside in Europe. So we quite often actually see Filipinos who've got some kind of European residency, and they don't need a Schengen visa as long as they keep up the terms of their residency card. So I think if his carte de séjour has expired, and he doesn't have a Schengen visa, he does need to leave the Schengen zone and apply for a valid Schengen visa if he wants to work on a yacht again. So I hope that answers that question for you, Juan. If not, then I'm happy to take questions. People can definitely write to me, and I can discuss him a situation a little bit more specifically.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, some of these questions are great. And there is more detail sometimes needed. And in that case, it's probably best that they ask you directly. And for those that are watching this, whether it be now or later, by all means, you can always email me. You can always email Kerry as well. And we'll get you the answers that you need, because, this is the industry, and this is the stuff that you need to know in order to do your jobs. Yeah. Another question from the Philippines, how to extend visa. I'm from Philippines. I'm assuming that he's in the EU and he's from the Philippines.
Yes. Again, it's hard to extend it. Well, you can't extend it if you're in Europe. The idea would be to go back to the Philippines. He may already be in the Philippines, I'm not sure. And there, from what I've seen, visas aren't extended or renewed. You have to put in a new application for a new visa. Right. So quite often people are saying extend. But it would be a question of doing a whole new form. If you've already done one before, then you know what's involved, and you would do a whole new application with the new information that you have. And I know that in the Philippines, you need an agent to process that visa for you. So there are several good agencies in the Philippines who can help you with that.
Right. And the second to last one here, Aidan Parent. I'm a South African here in France, wanting to know if there's a way to extend my visa from France. Again, he has to go back to South Africa.
Yes. Yeah, there's no other answer to that, unfortunately. Yep.
So I'm even answering questions now. Go me.
I know. That's why it does seem like a big, quite a scary concept, the Schengen visa, and a lot of people are unsure about it. But there is quite a set formula. There's not too many grey areas. It is what it is, unfortunately. And like you say, once we have your situation, then we can usually provide the answer to it. And as you see coming up, is quite often people are in the same situation.
Yeah. The last question we have here is, I would like to ask about my renewal Schengen visa. I'm in Europe now, Croatia, and it will expire on September 30th. Is it possible to renew my visa in Europe? I'm Dubai based. Actually, that's the first one we've had about Dubai, and working on a 47 meters motor yacht. And during summer, we are in Europe, and this year we'll stay in Europe till December.
Yeah, so that's the same again. If you can't extend within Europe, I'm assuming there will be an embassy in Dubai. If you're staying on board the boat and the boat goes back to Dubai at some point, then he can maybe apply to the embassy there for the Schengen visa. He wouldn't need to go home. But if the boat's staying in Europe until December, he can stay on board and live on board the vessel, as we said before.
Again, with the 10 kilometers radius.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, do you know what? I mean, I think it's really become clear for me anyways, that it's very important to ask these questions to somebody who knows, to go to the local agent and to get the answers needed. Now, for example, someone like your company, Evolution Yacht Agents, do you have like a file on your clients? So essentially, wherever they are, in 5 years from now, if they need your services again, you can pull up a file and, you sort of know their needs, and it's like a personal relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. We do have a crew coming back, and obviously when we usually on the larger boats, it's quite often the purser who has to deal with these kind of issues, and so the purser knows where we are, and she can help the crew member get this sorted. We don't tend to keep personal information on file because of the data protection laws that have come in. So usually we may be familiar with their name, and we may, I may remember their past history, but usually we need them to send all their information again because we can't keep everything on file. We usually have the answer. And again, we operate in Spain, and all these answers are coming from how we tend to deal with things and how the police like to make things happen here in Spain. But if you've done this process before and you're very familiar with how it happens in Spain, and then the next year you're in Italy, don't assume it happens exactly the same way as it does. You would definitely just need to have a conversation with your local agent in Italy and just say, listen, this is how it happened in Spain. Is it the same? What do you need? One example is here in Spain, or here in Barcelona, and the area that I kind of tend to work with, the police, they need to see the crew member in person when we're doing the stamping in and stamping out. Whereas I know in other countries and other ports, sometimes you can just give your passport to the agent. He goes to the police station, stamps, and then brings the passport back to you.
Right.
And this is maybe something we haven't spoken about, just when I say stamping in and out. When you have a Schengen visa you have a time limitation on it. So usually South Africans, for example, will be given a visa that lasts 1 or 2 years. And at any one time, they can spend 90 days in Europe. Now, vessels, especially here in Barcelona, which is why I tend to have a lot of experience, is because vessels quite often spend a lot more time than that in Europe, especially the ones coming here to the shipyard. They could be in the shipyard for 9, 10 months. And so when a crew has a limited time allowance, that can complicate things. And this is why when they arrive to the vessel, we can take them to the port police and stamp out. So I say they're being stamped out. Sometimes you'll hear the term they're on and off the boat. The way I kind of look at it is you're being stamped in and out of Europe. So you arrive into Barcelona, for example, you join the boat, you're going to be on the boat for the entire shipyard period, which is say 6 months. And in the meantime, you've got this in-stamp in your passport from the airport. What happens is those days start running, and you only have 90. So what we do is we take you to the port police station, and we get you stamped out as if you're relinquishing there your freedom of movement, which your visa allows. You're stamping out of Europe, you're stamping onto the boat. And at that point, you're saving your 90 days. So you're staying in the boat, you're staying within 10 kilometers of the vessel. And you're saving the 88 or 87 days that are left for a moment when you need to travel, you need to go do a course, you need to go on holiday. That's stamping out, the stamping in and stamping out. That's what I'm talking about. And then when it comes to disembark, say it's time for your holiday, you've been in the shipyard for 4 months. What we need to do is we need to stamp you back into Europe. So we reignite that visa again. The days start counting again. And you can take your holiday. You can disembark. You can travel further than 10 kilometers. You can go to Andorra skiing. You can fly to Paris for the weekend, or you can fly home.
So realistically, I mean, you could be working on the boat. You could enter Europe, be working on the boat for like 7 months, and still have your 90 days to do as you wish.
Exactly. So that's the whole point of this process, and that's why it's so important to be mindful of your stamps in and out in your passport. Say how many have you used, how many have you got left, so you don't violate the terms of that visa that could cause problems, in 2 years' time when you apply for another visa, or in 5 years' time when you apply for another visa. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, realistically, most things that when you're in yachting, most places that you are, the shipyards, the marinas, everything is with a 10-kilometer radius of anything that you might possibly.
Exactly.
Most sea schools are
Exactly.
within a 10-kilometer radius. Most of the bars that people hang out at, or any other thing that you may need, the restaurants, whatever, it's all within a 10-kilometer radius.
Exactly. So it is very workable, and it's very workable, and it is mindful of the yachting lifestyle. Yeah, the chief stew can go do the shopping, and the engineer can go visit his contractors, or however it might be. So you do have that. And again, it's 10 kilometers in Spain. I believe it's the same in Italy and France, but just check on that. But there is some radius with which you can operate ashore if you haven't necessarily if you've been stamped out of Europe, or you don't necessarily have the valid visa in place.
Yeah, I mean, even if the ship's in dry dock for a few months, I mean, there's crew houses that are like right around the corner from most areas where the dry docks are. So, you're not, more than likely, you could probably get away with it for. How would that work then? I mean, if they were working, on a yacht constantly, year in, year out, they had the same employer. If they were careful, they could stay for a very long time without worrying about a Schengen visa. Or is there a time limit on those?
Well, yeah. So when you have a Schengen visa, usually it has an issue date and an expiry date.
Okay.
So you may well have not even used all of the 90 days, but if your visa is only 12 months, and it expires on the 30th of April, after the 30th of April, that visa is no longer of use. Okay. Yeah, they can no longer be used for anything. So you would need to get a transit visa to go back home, or you just plan your holiday so that you go back home before the 30th of April, and you can apply for a new one while you're home, and then you can come back.
And is that the most common one then, only a year, or does some countries issue you longer visas, or?
I don't tend to see them for more than 2 years from what I've seen. Okay. South Africans and Filipinos, which are the most common ones that we see. South Africans usually 1 or 2 years. Filipinos are much more restricted. And I think I mentioned at the beginning of this. The embassies, at least the Spanish embassies, the Spanish embassy in Manila, they only issue short-term visas, so just enough to allow the crew member to arrive to the vessel. But sometimes it's a 10-day visa, sometimes it's a month visa. So this needs to be your yacht agent needs to pay attention to that when they're looking at the terms of the visa. And again, the crew member needs to be mindful of this when they're traveling or planning their travels, and explaining to the vessel, if they're joining a vessel, listen, I have a visa, but this is the validity.
So with the Filipinos, essentially their visas are more like a transit visa for somebody from South Africa, for example, if it's a 10-day visa.
Much more restricted. It's much more restricted, yes.
Interesting. Well, do you know what? I've learned a lot today, and I'm sure that a lot of others have learned a lot today. I'm feeling pretty smart now. Thanks.
Yeah, like I say, it is quite straightforward once, hopefully it's become a little bit more clear from the various scenarios that we've presented. But hopefully I've also stressed that it is best just to talk to your agent and find out what needs to be done in the area where you're traveling. Even if you're not embarking or disembarking, just give them a call and say, listen, I'm coming and this is my situation. I'm okay. I'm okay to behave this way, or I'm okay to move in this regard. Is that correct? It's always good just to ask, because you tend to have, and like I say, with who knows how the European borders are going to be fluctuating in the next 5 or 10 years. So we're just trying to keep ahead of the game and make sure, our biggest aim is just to try and educate crew and make sure they know these questions need to be asked, so they understand the terms and what they can do and can't do.
Well, I mean, I think there's going to be questions coming up now with the whole Brexit deal coming up at the end of October. I think, because I mean, the 3 major yachting crew members that come from countries are the UK, of course, Australia and New Zealand, and South Africa, the 4. But is there going to be a lot of changes if Brexit occurs? How is that going to work? We're going to see a lot of changes.
I'm keeping my eye on it, but I can't say. I mean, I assume the British passport would behave as the American and the Australian passport behaves, and that there'll be a 90-day 90-day allowance without any visa required. And just when you enter European territory, you get that stamp in, and you have 90 days in any 90 days in a 6-month period in which you can travel in Europe. But I don't know, like I say,
No.
Brexit is...
it's still confusing. I mean, you know, and
Yeah.
I'm lucky because I'm from Canada, for the simple fact that I know what my rights are. Those aren't changing anytime soon. Nothing is going to be
True.
changing. You know, it is. I mean, we didn't have the freedom of movement that England had with Europe, but at least I knew.
Yeah.
And now it's. I think that is worse, is having that sort of confusion and the up in the air and not really having a clue. But I would really love to have you back on board. I mean, we're going to have you back next week, and then maybe we can talk about B1, B2 visas.
Yeah, I'd love to.
And then maybe after Brexit, if it does go through, that maybe we can have you on again.
Then we won't have to have that conversation. But yeah, I'm happy to come back. And like I say, within the experience that I've got, I'm happy to talk about anything, just to try and educate people out there so that situations don't arise. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you ever so much, Kerry. We're going to provide your information after we go off air, so that if people have any further questions that they want answered, that they can get a hold of you. They can also, of course, get a hold of me via info@yachtinginternationalradio.com, and I will forward that on to you. I look forward to speaking to you sometime next week. I'm not sure exact time or date yet, but we'll plan that off air. We'll deal with some B1, B2 issues this time around.
Okay.
So that's Evolution Yacht Agents. Kerry, thank you so much. And we'll speak again soon.
Pleasure. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.